Good. Prepare yourself for the day, I said to myself, feeling my courage slowly returning. In a moment, we will bid each other good morning. And I grasped the short dagger which I had taken from the Malgrabins. At that moment, the leopard turned her face toward me and gazed steadfastly without moving. The rigidity of her steely eyes and their unendurable brilliancy made me shudder, especially when the beast walked toward me. But I gazed at her with a caressing expression and, smiling at her as if to magnetize her, allowed her to come close to me. And then, with a touch as gentle and loving as if I were caressing the fairest of women, I passed my hand over her body, scratching with my nails the flexible vertebrae which formed the leopard's yellow back. The animal stiffened her tail with pleasure. Her eyes became softer. And when I repeated the caress, she began to purr, as cats do to express pleasure. But the sound came forth from a throat so deep and so powerful that it rang through the grotto like the last notes of an organ through a church. I realized how important were these caresses and repeated them, soothing her, lulling her. When I felt sure I had allayed the ferocity of this strange companion, whose hunger had certainly been satisfied the night before, I rose and started to leave the cave. The leopard allowed me to go. But when I had climbed the hill, she bounded after me as lightly as a sparrow hops from branch to branch and rubbed against my legs, curving her back like a domestic cat. I tried playing with her ears, patting her sides, scratching her head hard with my nails, and finding that I was successful, I carefully tickled her skull with the point of my dagger, watching breathlessly for an opportunity to kill her. But the hardness of the bones made me afraid that I might not succeed. Sultana of the desert showed her approval of my talents by stretching out her neck luxuriously. Suddenly, I thought that to murder that savage princess with a single blow, I would have to stab her in the throat. And I had already, with painful caution, raised the blade when she made a sudden abrupt movement and slid gracefully to my feet. She was apparently satisfied and looked at me from time to time with glances which, despite their natural savagery, had a vague expression of kindness. But what will happen when she is hungry, I thought. Despite the shudder caused by that idea, I began to observe with interest the proportions of the leopard. Certainly one of the finest examples of the species, for she was 3 feet in height and 4 feet long, not including the tail. The face, which was as large as a lioness's, was distinguished by an expression of extraordinary shrewdness. The unfeeling cruelty of the tiger was predominant there, but there was also a vague resemblance to the face of an artful woman. At the moment, there was a kind of merriment on her features. She had quenched her thirst in blood and was now inclined to play. She followed my every movement with her eyes, resembling not so much a faithful dog as a great Angora cat, distrustful of everything, even her master's movements. And then I saw beside the spring the remains of my horse. The leopard had brought the body all that distance. About 2/3 of it was consumed. It was easy then to explain the leopard's absence and her letting me alone while I slept. I felt suddenly encouraged. I was prodded by my good fortune to tempt the future and conceived the wild hope of living on good terms with the leopard from day to day, of trying, while the remains of the horse was there for her food, to use every method of taming her and of winning her good graces. I sat down fearlessly beside her, and we began to play together. I patted her paws and her nose, twisted her ears, threw her over on her back, and roughly scratched her soft, warm flanks. She made no objection, and when I attempted to smooth the hair on her paws, she carefully withdrew her nails, which were curved like Damascus blades. With one hand on my dagger, I was still thinking of thrusting it into the side of the too trusting leopard, but I was afraid of being strangled in her last convulsions. Moreover, with the thought, there now came for a quick moment the heavy shock of remorse, for it seemed to me that in this lonely, boundless desert, I had found a friend. Involuntarily, I thought of my first sweetheart, whom I had nicknamed Mignon. That memory of youth suggested the idea of trying to make the young leopard answer to that name. I admired her agility, her grace, and her gentleness with less terror now. Toward the close of day, I had become accustomed to my hazardous situation, and I was almost in love with its dangers. My strange companion had finally caught the habit of turning to me when I called Mignon, and when night fell, I allowed her to enter the cave first. She curled up on the stone floor, and soon, by her regular breathing, I knew she was asleep. I had to seize this chance. Another day of grace might not be spared me. I rose quietly and walked rapidly toward the Nile. But I had barely traveled a quarter of a mile through the sand when I heard the leopard bounding after me, uttering at intervals a saw-like cry which was even more alarming than the heavy thud of her bounds in the deep silence. Well, I said to myself, she had really taken a fancy to me. It may be that this young leopard has never met a man before. How flattering to possess her first love. At that moment, I stepped into one of those dangerous quicksands from which it is impossible to escape. I started to sink rapidly and screamed in alarm. The leopard seized me by the collar with her teeth and with a powerful backward leap rescued me from certain death. She trotted nervously about me as I lay on the sand, and I stared at this animal with disbelief. All right, Mignon. It's a matter of life or death between us now. Let's see. And I retraced my steps to the hill, the leopard by my side. From that moment, the desert was, in a sense, peopled for me. It contained a living creature to whom I could talk, whose ferocity meant nothing to me, without any comprehension on my part of the reasons for her unbelievable friendship. However much I thought I should remain up on my guard, I fell asleep, and when I awoke, I saw nothing of Mignon. I ascended the hill and saw her in the far distance, bounding along the sands. She would return with a blood-smeared mouth, receive my caresses, and manifest her delight by repeated deep purrs. Her eyes rested with even more mildness than before on me. She played as a huge puppy plays with its master, allowing him to roll her over and pat her, and sometimes she challenged me by putting her paw upon me with an appealing gesture. Several days passed. This companionship enabled me to admire the sublime beauties of the desert. From the moment that I found there moments of dread and of security, food to eat, and a creature of whom I could think, my mind was excited by contrasts. It was a life full of opposing sensations. Solitude made manifest all its secrets to me, enveloped me in all its charm. I discovered spectacles unknown to the world in the rising and the setting of the sun. I started when I heard above my head the soft whirring of the wings of a bird, or when I watched the clouds melt together. During the night, I studied the effects of the moon on the ocean of sand. I lived in the gorgeous light of the Orient. And often, after enjoying the awful spectacle of a storm on that plain where the sand rose in a dry red mist in death-dealing clouds, I rejoiced at the approach of night, for then the delicious coolness of the stars fell upon the earth, and I listened to the imaginary music in the skies. Solitude taught me, too, to seek the treasures of reverie. I passed whole hours recalling trifles, comparing my past life with my present one, and understanding its significance where I had no way to understand before. And lastly, I conceived a warm regard for my leopard, for affection was an absolute necessity to me. And I finally ceased to distrust her when I found she had become so tame. But always I suspected the sudden end to this strange freak of nature, and kept a watchful eye for that moment of escape if any human being should pass through the circle of the horizon. I had tied my shirt to the top of a leafless palm, keeping it unfolded by the use of sticks on windless days. But it was during the long hours when hope abandoned me that I played with my leopard. I had learned the different inflections of her voice, different expressions of her eyes. I had studied all the gradations of color of her golden coat. Mignon no longer even growled when I seized the tuft of hair at the end of her tail. I took pleasure in gazing at the graceful and voluptuous lines of her figure and the shapeliness of her head. But it was especially when I was playing with her that I delighted in watching her, and the youthful agility of her movements always surprised me. I admired her suppleness when she bounded, crept, glided, crouched, clung, rolled over and over, darted here and there. But however swift her bound, however slippery the boulder, she always stopped short at the word mignon. One day, in the dazzling sunlight, an enormous bird hovered in the sky. I left my leopard to watch this new guest, but after waiting a moment, my neglected sultana uttered a low growl. I turned and saw that her eyes had become steely once more. God forgive me, I cried. I believe that she is jealous. The eagle disappeared while I reassured Mignon with soothing caresses. There was so much youthful grace in her outline. She was as pretty as a woman. We looked at each other with an air of comprehension. For forced to live in this world of simplicity, of unlimited beauty, there was nothing that could not be understood between us. She felt her friend's nails scratching her head, and her eyes shone like flashes of lightning. Then she closed them tight. She has a soul, I said, as I studied the tranquil repose of that queen of the sands, as solitary and burning as those sands, as white as their pulsing light. And the time passed until there was no time. Whatever men live by and hope for in the world of men had ceased to be a real part of my being. I was a creature in this beautiful natural world, with a creature to understand and to love beside me. The shirt was still tied to the palm, but I had long ceased to hope, and had entered a world of new hope, until one day the world was shattered in the form of a screaming bullet that ripped into Mignon's flank as we played in the morning sun. Far in the distance, a patrol of soldiers had seen the signal on the palm, had seen us, and suspecting that a man was being attacked by a wild beast, had fired the shot that sent the blood flowing from her flank. Her steely eyes glared with a ferocious brilliance, and growling savagely, she pushed violently against me with her shoulder, flinging me to the ground. I think now, I know, that what she tried to do was to back me up into the safety of the cave. But I knew only with the sight of a savage beast looming over me and the sense of men nearby, I knew with a rush of undesired consciousness that I was a man, and that this was a beast, and that enemies must kill. I swung my arm up as I lunged, and I plunged my dagger into her throat. I shivered in terror at this insane boldness, for she was standing directly over me, but she fell without retaliation and rolled over without a cry which tore my soul. I saw her struggle and gaze at me without a trace of anger, and a volley of bullets smashed into her head and bleeding body. and the shouts of men were rushing up the hill. They didn't know what I meant by murder. They couldn't understand my weeping. They can never realize that there is a world of beauty and understanding beyond theirs. It would do me no good to explain that in the desert there is all and yet nothing. They would never understand that God is there and man is not.